Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to week 2 of the Indo-Dutch Cybersecurity School 2025. We've got a really interesting lecture today on vulnerability management by Krishna Singapuram. Just before we begin, I'll do a quick bit of reminders to everyone. You should have all received an email today with a link to the survey for the challenge preferences. Really do fill this in. It's key to fill this in if you want to take part in the challenges and as a result to get the certificate of participation. So this is really important. We've extended the deadline a little bit, so you still have time. The survey, it really only takes a minute to fill in, and it's really worth it. If you have both certificates, the certificate of attendance and the certificate of participation, there's a lot of benefits. Accelerator programs, what we'll soon learn on Wednesday, about deals with cyber people and Blockverse Academy. So lots of learning opportunities beyond just the IDCSS25. So I really encourage everyone to fill in the survey. You can find it both in your email, but it's also on the IDCSS website if you look at the challenges part. The only other thing I'm going to very quickly mention is to don't forget to fill in the cyber resilience game that we had the first session last week. You have until Friday this week to fill it in. But yeah, that's everything from my side. So today we have Krishna Singapuram, who has over a decade of diversified experience over the cyber landscape, and he has experience in proxy solutions, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, amongst lots of other things. He currently works as a senior consultant in cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and has been helping a lot with the cyber school as well. So he's really knowledgeable. And with that, over to you, Sai Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. So as Alex has mentioned, so myself, I am Sai Krishna Singapuram. I am the senior cybersecurity consultant at Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is a part of Data Security Council of India. So we'll be talking about enterprise vulnerability management today, what it is all about, what does the subject say, and what it really means to have a vulnerability management process in place for organizations. I'm just sharing my screen in a second. Hope my screen is visible, Alex.
Yes, looks good.
So we'll try to understand what vulnerability management is all about, what are the different phases, what does each phase talk about, and if there are any tools and frameworks that are out there. And inside an organization's security operations, how will we integrate vulnerability management, including DevSecOps also, the in development pipeline in an organization. Even though you are not a cybersecurity person, you are only used to working in, like a development team or CI/CD pipelines, still vulnerability management is a must for an organization and every individual who is working inside an organization. And then comes, how the metrics are calculated, what are the severities, and how the risk treatment actually happens in an organization. And then comes a bit of emerging trends and case studies. So first, before we dig into vulnerability management, we'll try to understand what is a vulnerability first. In simple terms, vulnerability is nothing but the weakness inside a system. So it can happen and it can occur in various forms. So one would be just because there was a flawed compute logic inside a system or an application, or it might be due to misconfiguration. Even though you had good technology, you didn't configure it properly. Or if there is any new modus operandi or a new technique that has been discovered to exploit a system to tamper with its confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the ultimate goal of cybersecurity is to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when we are talking about these three aspects, I believe in one of the sessions this was already covered. So I'll just touch on it briefly. So when you're talking about confidentiality, any application, tool, or a system that you are using or trusting with your data, it has to ensure that only authorized individuals should be able to access this particular info. That is confidentiality. When it comes to integrity, the nature of the data or the state of the data should not be altered by any means by an unauthorized vector. So, for example, say you have a Google Drive where you have saved some photographs or you have certain documents which you are working on. It should be only accessible to you and only you. It should be only edited by you as an individual since you are the authorized person. So if at all I am sending you a message called hi, and by the time you receive it is bye, then already the integrity of this particular communication has already been hampered. So cybersecurity ensures that this integral integrity is maintained throughout the supply chain, or you can call it as throughout the communication pipeline. And then comes availability. When you're talking about availability, most of the times it is on the lines whenever you're trusting your data with me. For example, Google Drive, you have shared your files, or in Google Photos, you have shared your photos and uploaded it. You always want to access them on demand, right? So whenever you want to access it, the data should be readily available. So cybersecurity ensures that the data is confidential, and the integrity of your data is not altered in any format, and availability ensures maximum availability to the user. So the primary goal of cybersecurity is to achieve these three key factors. And before we dig into it, so every vulnerability, so we spoke about certain weaknesses inside a system, right? So if at all there is some sort of a loophole in the logic that has been already built, or certain application or a tool has certain vulnerability, so they are assigned with something called as a CVE ID. It is called Common Vulnerability Exposure. So if you see here, one second. So this is the CVE's website. If at all someone is interested, cve.org. When you go to this website, you will have a ton of information about different vulnerabilities that are out there. So whenever you visit certain website, you have different vulnerabilities listed, and each vulnerability is assigned with a unique ID. So, for example, so here every CVE is recorded, and everyone actually publishes a CVE with a unique ID, which will help us to understand what type of an vulnerability it is, what application it is impacting, and what is the remedial fix for this particular vulnerability. So every CVE will have the year of discovery in the year which it was actually first notified or discovered, and then a unique number is assigned for each CVE ID. Okay, there will be always a description and certain references about the vulnerability. So the description talks about what type of a vulnerability it is, what application it is impacting, and what is the nature of vulnerability. If someone is trying to exploit this vulnerability, what type of an impact it will have, and if there are any known remedial measures, it will also have certain recommendations inside the application, which will talk about different steps that you can follow. And if you want to understand about each vulnerability, there is a website called National Vulnerability Database, where you can go and find out about different vulnerabilities. So this is called National Vulnerability Database. If you go, this is maintained by NIST, the National Institute of Standards. So if you go here, there are different vulnerabilities, each talking about specific information. So if you look at recent vulnerabilities that have been published, so there are security researchers and threat analysts across the globe who are actively working on identifying different vulnerabilities impacting different devices and softwares. So if you look here, as I mentioned, so someone has reported this in 2025. So this is a recent one. You can see when it was published, the CVE dictionary entry, as I mentioned, the year of detection, and then the unique ID that has been assigned to it. And here, as I mentioned, there is a proper description about the vulnerability, what it talks about. And you have different references. Like if someone has running proper POC, someone has given you an exploit for exploiting this particular vulnerability, and an advisory for the clients. For example, if you are using, say, Cisco AnyConnect as a tool or an application in your corporate infrastructure, and there is a vulnerability that has been detected. Here in the references, you can find how to fix it, what are the steps to be taken, if there is any specific update which has to be enabled inside your infrastructure. All this information is actually provided here. So I cannot blindly come and say that, okay, this is a vulnerability, there might be an issue for your application, right? So there is a POC created by every security researcher to simulate. So if at all you are a threat analyst or a threat researcher, you can also see how this vulnerability can be exploited, or certain exploit can be tested in your organization. As I mentioned, so NVD is like a repository. It has all the vulnerability information, so it directly syncs with CVEs. So anyone who is submitting, you will find all the information here. You can come and search based on types, at the same time device, nature of vulnerabilities, etc. Right? So there is something called as CVSS, called Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So now we are in CVSS 4.0 stage. So what this talks about is based on the susceptibility of an attack, the impact it might have, and to what extent it can cause damage, and how rampant this particular vulnerability is inside the ecosystem. Based on all this, so there is a group called FIRST. So they have come up with the categorization for these vulnerabilities. So they have created certain components which are helping them to map and understand what are the different levels of the criticalities. So currently we have CVSS 4.0. So this is the latest one that the industry is following. So here you'll understand based on what type of info. So previously it was CVSS 3.1. So from 3.1 to 4.0, a new group was added, supplemental metric group. So here you can see there are new components which have been added. So subsequent system confidentiality, integrity, availability. If something is actually tampering or can impact the CIA triad of any information system, and what type of requirements need to have by the perpetrator to perform a successful attack on the infrastructure. So these informations are collected, and based on this, the severity of a vulnerability is identified. So low, medium, high, critical. So we'll talk about how an organization reacts to such risks. But this is in a nutshell, because before we enter into vulnerability management, you need to have this particular info handy, right? First, you have to understand what is a vulnerability, what are the severity types, what each CVID talks about, and what is the nature of an attack, nature of impact that it will have on an organization. So these are like foundational concepts that you might think about. So every organization needs to have a vulnerability management plan. But before we go into that subject, why does an enterprise or an organization would require vulnerability management? To reduce the attack surface. So when the moment you are connected to internet and the moment you are online, you have to understand that you are susceptible to a breach. So there is nothing like a Fort Knox in cyber. So you will not be hacked immediately, but can be hacked definitely. So since we know that we are not 100% hack proof, so there is nothing called as hack proof. So we ensure that we try to identify all our gaps, try to be ready to the max extent possible. So whenever you are talking about certain India, so computer emergency response team India, so certain guidelines, or if there are any complaints that you are following or an organization is following, we still know that we are trying to ensure that we beef up the security to max extent possible. But at the end of the day, still there might be certain loopholes through which a successful attack might occur. So our intention through vulnerability management first is to attack that particular attack surface. So reduce the attack surface, and then comes meet regulatory and compliance needs. So each regulatory body or a compliance requirement comes up with certain levels of controls that have to be deployed in an organization. So when you take about any complaints or a standard, industry standard that is out there, vulnerability management is a given, because first you have to know what is your infrastructure, what type of assets you own, what type of a presence you have, and all this information is first collected, because you can't secure something which you don't know in the first place. So our intention is to first identify those assets, secure the assets. As I said, there is no hack proof, but we'll try to add some sort of a security measure to max extent possible. So if you are following defense in depth, for example, DID, so there are like 7 layers that we are talking about, from data layer to the perimeter level. And at the same time, there is something called as zero trust. When you're talking about zero trust, what is the slogan that we go with? Never trust, always verify. Right. So the moment you're talking about a zero trust architecture, the moment you're talking about defense in depth, at each layer, a different security control will come into picture. For example, you cannot secure an operating system with the same approach that you're following for a network device. So network device has certain security controls. So for example, if at all you want to monitor your traffic, you want to log your traffic, you want to ensure that only relevant traffic will come into your organization. And at the same time, you're also going to have something called as retention policies. So in order to adhere to these compliance and regulatory requirements, you need to have a proper retention policy in picture. Then comes prevent data breach and downtime. So as I mentioned, to max extent possible, availability will play an important role. For example, someone identified that during Flipkart Big Billion Days or Amazon Great Indian Festival, they want to attack these two infrastructures, there will be billions of loss for these organizations, right? Just because they make a ton of money only during these particular festive seasons. So what happens here? So in order to ensure, because we know that hackers are everywhere, we know that perpetrators are everywhere. So in order for us to ensure that the infrastructure is resilient enough to withstand such an attempt for attacks, we ensure that we identify these vulnerabilities first, try to remediate or treat them. So this also plays a big role in risk treatment. So understanding risks, identifying risks, trying to ensure that we treat those risks and mitigate to max extent possible. When you're talking about risk management, so not every time we can actually get rid of a risk directly. There is something called as risk treatment. Yes, you have identified your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses. You try to treat it to max extent possible, but there might be certain third-party dependencies or the nature of the application, whether it is front-facing or it is internal-facing, whether someone is able to access it via VPN, without VPN, XYZ. So based on all these parameters, there is a concept called residual risk, right? So even though you treated the risk inside an organization, the residual risk still lingers inside an organization. So in order to ensure that these particular risks are monitored in real time, enterprise vulnerability management will come into picture, because you're scanning your infrastructure and your environment continuously to detect if there is any vulnerability inside your organization. It might be a known vulnerability, it might be an unknown vulnerability, or it might be a sudden 0 day that has been detected by some security researcher, or an active threat actor campaign that is running on dark web. And enhance cyber resilience. So as I mentioned, so every organization has cyber resiliency roadmap. So they want to be, it is not like hack proof, but everyone wants to ensure that they are secure to max extent possible. In that particular roadmap, vulnerability management takes the first step there. So what is vulnerability management? So it is a continuous process of identifying, evaluating, treating, and reporting security vulnerabilities in systems and softwares. So today, vulnerability management can also monitor hardware. So if at all there are some hardware devices that are connected inside an infrastructure, even that information can be actually pulled in into one single dashboard. For example, whenever you are talking about any enterprise grade infrastructure, so there are ton of devices. If at all you look at your organization itself, like at your home, if you look at, there are minimum of 10 to 15 devices. If at all there are at least five people inside a household, everyone holds a mobile phone, everyone has a laptop, everyone at least has one desktop. Everything today is smart, right? So you have connected refrigerators, connected air conditioners, XYZ. Even a dustbin is termed smart today just because some sort of intelligence that has been attached. So we are actually long surpassed this way of Internet of Things. Now we are in a zone of Internet of everything. Like every device, every asset is able to communicate with each other. So previously, in the initial phase of information revolution, it was like human to machine, and slowly machine to human. But now it is between machine to machine and machine to everything out there. So the communication aspect has grown phenomenally high. So when it comes to vulnerability management, what are we trying to do first? As I mentioned, you can't protect what you don't know in the first place. So what are we trying to do? There is something called as discovery. So we'll first identify what is the surface that we have, and then understand based on this particular infrastructure that we are holding, what are the different attacks or the threat actors, the means for the threat actors to come inside the organization. So the first one is assessment. So you'll try to assess your infrastructure, understand your attack surface. What are the different ways in which someone can come and attack, or various entry points inside an organization? How can someone actually come into the organization, or what is the extent to which someone can perform some sort of an attack? So pre-work, if you look at, so first, whenever you go with your vulnerability management program inside your organization, you first determine the scope of the program. Like what are you trying to monitor? Are you only going to go with servers which are very critical for availability aspect, or are you also monitoring your user endpoints inside your organization? Are you going to map your network devices, all the infrastructure that is associated with your organization? Are you going to do this? Are you performing an external attack surface management? So any information that is publicly available about the company, all the front-facing assets, are they being continuously monitored for vulnerabilities? Because people come and interact with your system using these front-facing assets. So are you going to include them in your scope? So as part of your prerequisites, first you actually come up with the determination of scope of your program, then define roles and responsibilities. So who is going to identify, who is going to treat these vulnerabilities, who are the different players that come in. For example, say if at all I said, okay, a new vulnerability or a zero day has been detected in one of this firmware version of a network monitoring solution, for example. So immediately it has to go to the network team. The network admin or the supervisor of this particular network team has to acknowledge this particular vulnerability and then perform the remediation action plan. Sometimes a remediation or a risk, what you call a fix is not readily available. So what they will do with the information they have handy, they'll try to reduce the impact of this attack to certain extent. So they wait for a fix, or they ensure they take down the system for a while. It depends on the business need this particular application or the software holds when a vulnerability or a zero day has been detected in the wild. Then select vulnerability assessment tools. So there are a ton of tools out there. A lot of companies, I believe everyone will agree, cybersecurity is a fad now. A lot of innovation has been seen in the country. Many players have already jumped in. So understanding and identifying which tool will fit your requirement and your needs, and create and refine policies and SLS. So we spoke about different severity levels for vulnerabilities: low, medium, high, and critical. So when are you going to patch them? What is the timeline that is required for you to patch them? And how are you, categorizing them? How are you going to fix them? What is your risk treatment strategy? Once you do this, who is going to acknowledge it and who is going to perform the remediation option? Because when you're talking about remediation, sometimes cost factor will also kick in. So the policy has to be refined and drafted for the organization. It depends on the nature of business, the customers that you have, the data that you are processing, and the domain that you are actually catering to. All this information, and at the same time, the compliance and regulatory bodies with which you are actually adhering. So based on that info, you create your SLA profile and a proper policy for your organization. And then identify asset context sources. So what type of asset is being used for what, and whether it's an internal facing asset, is it an external facing asset, and others. So in the initial phase, you first scan your entire infrastructure. The moment you have identified all the assets, you are running a proper scan on those particular assets. And after you have scanned your entire infrastructure, you are going to create a repository of all the known vulnerabilities. So you are ensuring that you have collected enough information about your infrastructure and you are creating a report. Okay, now you have collected all the vulnerabilities that might be out there inside your organization or the ecosystem of your business, for example. Once you have done it, what you have to do is you prioritize, like which vulnerability you are going to treat first. What is the action plan for you? Or which vulnerability has to be treated so that it reduces the impact of damage in terms of an adversarial attack. So add threat context. So we'll talk about threat vulnerability and risk in a minute. And then comes gauge exposure, to what extent it can really be exploited. If at all it is something which has a very low probability, would you have to really fix it? Spending some money, effort, or sometimes because of certain upgrades, applications might not work properly without being tested. So whether you can deploy a patch without testing it, can you take that risk? For example, recently, if everyone is aware of CrowdStrike, I shouldn't name them, but at least there was some issue with respect to an upgrade, because of which everyone saw this error of BSOD, blue screen of death. So it crippled many services across US, especially since most of the customers use this one particular product, right? And assign business value. Assign value in the sense the extent of damage it can do to the business, how much money you can lose, or if at all you are really attacked using this vulnerability, how much money you have to spend to again come back on track. This is called business continuity planning, right? So to ensure your business stays afloat and you're able to cater to all your customers in real time. Then comes after you have prioritized which risks to be treated and in what order they have to be treated, you go into the act phase. So how are you going to act it? As I said, sometimes it is acceptance risk. For example, you are an ATM, you are talking about some software in an ATM machine. Most of the ATMs were using Windows XP, some were using Windows 7. So if at all you are going to go beyond this particular operating systems, the systems might not function properly, right? So the business need is being hampered the moment you say that you have to upgrade or come out of this particular zone where you are vulnerable to certain attack. So there comes the concept of acceptance risk. So as I said, risk treatment is fine, but at the same time, sometimes there is no fix. It might be because of two reasons. One, a fix is not readily available. Second, even though there is a fix available, if at all it demands upgrades, legacy systems won't work properly. So in order for business continuity, you ensure that you accept that risks, perform certain other additional security steps. For example, if at all there is some sort of a network device or some systems which cannot be protected, isolate that particular network, ensure that the it is not front face, it is not a front facing asset, or ensure you have additional security controls in place, which will monitor every traffic that is coming into these particular vulnerable assets. So there are different ways in which we do that. Then comes, if at all there is, as I mentioned, there is a description, there might be a fix and about each vulnerability that is out there. So based on the steps that have been defined in different portals, rightly now I mentioned, and there is something called as threat advisory that comes in from like organization, for example, Fortinet, if at all you're using a product from Forti. So whenever you're using a product of them, you can subscribe to the threat intel feed. Their security teams day in, day out research about different vulnerabilities inside their own product. They also study the behavior of threat actors outside. They'll see if at all someone is trying to leverage certain vulnerability or some sort of a weakness inside their application or a tool. And if they're able to access or break into their system, immediately as soon as they find it, they release a threat advisory for their customers to consume. So this threat advisory will contain valuable information about what type of a vulnerability, the extent of damage it can do, and how you can fix it. The how is really something that engineers are interested in, because they have to ensure that the systems are resilient to max possible. And then based on the remediation stats, whatever they have been mentioning, we try to mitigate those particular risks that arise from this vulnerability. And after this comes a reassess. So once you have fixed it, or once you believe you have run certain ops on this particular system based on different recommendations you have seen across different threat feeds, or across the internet, immediately you come and rescan your infrastructure. Okay, now you understand, fine, I have done this and it is working fine. So imagine you are doing this as a proactive scan, but at the same time, before an application goes go live in the sense. So tomorrow morning, I am a government. I am saying tomorrow morning I am going to launch a new scheme. This scheme can be utilized by citizens using this XYZ portal. So tomorrow morning, if I'm launching the portal, there might be certain miscreants, there might be some threat actors who want to destroy or try to perform certain havoc for the government. So before we launch this application, we perform a thorough vulnerability assessment of the product. We'll try to identify whether all the packages that we deployed in these applications are free from vulnerabilities. Is the software up to date? Are there third-party dependencies which need some sort of assessment? And is the application resilient to max extent possible? And as part of vulnerability management, we also do something called as penetration testing, where after you have fixed the vulnerabilities inside an application, we try to test the resiliency of the product also. Then comes improvement. So after you have done the reassessment, you have run the rescan, you have validated your application and softwares, you go with the evaluation metrics. So if at all there are any dependencies, you go with underlying, you identify those underlying issues, you try to fix them, or you ensure that such vulnerabilities will not come back again. Sometimes it might be just because of misconfiguration, or sometimes an application is not required in your organization. Still, you are using that application because of which whose vulnerability is being exploited and someone is able to get into your organization. That's one part. Evolve your process and so if at all you were not able to treat these vulnerabilities in time, and just because of that you got breached, maybe your policy that you have in place or the SLAs that you're working upon is not serving the purpose. So you try to validate them. You try to come up with new plans and then update them based on especially our current industry trends, and ensure your system is resilient to max extent possible. So once you have done this, you see the evaluation metrics. So on an average, how many vulnerabilities are being detected, the speed at which they are being fixed, or the nature of impact of breach, or the nature of breach in the recent times, whether your company is able to withstand to max threat actor activity that is happening in the wild. So, and as I said, this is a continuous process. So just because we said that, okay, we reach the milestone of improvement phase, it is not only about lessons learned. Again, you have to apply those lessons, and then the same cycle continues again and again. Right? So when you're talking about vulnerabilities, as I said, there are like the concept widens when it comes to an enterprise infrastructure, because there are various vulnerabilities which might arise for an organization. So there might be because of internal risks, it might be because of process lapse, it might be because not having a proper security roadmap, it might be because of insider threats or likelihood to experience harm. It might be human centered. For example, the employees in an organization don't have proper information about vulnerabilities. They don't care about it. And if you are in a development team, you're in a DevOps team or CI/CD pipeline integration teams, you're not thinking about any outdated components, then it is going to cause an issue for the organization. Vulnerability as a dualistic approach of susceptibility and coping capacity. So as I said, the susceptibility of an attack. Yes, there is a vulnerability, but how many people are able to exploit it? Is it an internal facing asset? It is publicly facing asset, and the speed at which someone can actually run that attack on us, the what you call the threat actor's capacity or capability that is really required to exploit such a vulnerability inside your organization. All this is considered. Vulnerability as a multiple structure, as I mentioned, susceptibility, coping capacity, exposure, adaptive capacity. To what extent can also adapt to the such vulnerabilities that are coming, and also the attacks that will actually happen, how fastly you can actually respond to them as well. Multi-dimensional vulnerability encompassing physical, social, economic, environmental, and institutional features. So as I said, nature of business also plays a key role here. What type of controls you have in picture, what type of adherence to compliance and standards that you have or you have to have. So all this actually play a key role. And there are certain vulnerabilities when it comes to environmental hazards also. For example, when you're talking about data centers, they are not chosen like randomly across any geographical location. You look for flat surfaces, you look for plateaus where there is less tectonic movement also. Because whenever you're talking about disaster recovery, disaster response, business continuity, you are going to look for locations which are free from certain environmental hazards. If at all a data center is really on a coastline, if there is an earthquake, tsunami kicks in, then definitely the entire DR site will be wiped off, right? So based on these different categories, business needs, nature of business, XYZ, are all factored in whenever you are building from ground up for any institute or a data center. So why this real-time scanning will help you? Like why you have to do it as a continuous process or not as a one-time job? So in today's cloud first era, vulnerability assessment should take place continuously to maintain good asset hygiene. So here again, you have to understand one thing, vulnerability management is different, vulnerability assessment is different. So vulnerability asset assessment is nothing but just scanning, understanding what type of vulnerability is there inside an organization. But when it comes to vulnerability management, it is like the complete blueprint an organization is following. So the moment a new asset is added, for example, today a team X came and said that, okay, we are going to launch a new application and we are using certain tool stack. So this particular tool stack will come into picture. So they say that, okay, I have to only deploy this on Kubernetes, and your organization didn't have K8 container until now. So suddenly you have to add Kubernetes also. So the moment you are adding new components, and especially because of cloud and SaaS based model. So whenever you're talking about software as a service or any SaaS based model inclusions that you are doing inside your organization, the attack surface slowly expands. It might be because of two or three reasons, right? One would be to meet the customer demand. Second one would be help you adapt to the latest advancement in technology. For example, as soon as the AI race came in, everyone I was actually behind this particular fad. So why this is required? So a directed focus on the external attack surface by configuring notifications to be received whenever new and unknown assets or critical issues are detected. So what does this talk about? Whenever a new asset is being entered inside your infrastructure, a new software is being utilized, a new vulnerability has been detected in the wild, or some sort of a new threat report that has come in based on active exploitation happening in the wild, all this information in real time, if someone has access to it, they can reduce the impact of damage or reduce the propagation of this particular attack for their organization. So some organization will not have the luxury of a cyber attack. For example, what if someone can launch a cyber attack on a nuclear facility, on a communication infrastructure? So if you look at Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Palestine, the first infrastructures that got hit by cyber attacks were critical infrastructures. So when you are talking about critical infrastructure, the uptime is really, really essential for those infras. So you cannot afford a cybersecurity attack on them. So how are you going to do that? So an proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. देख लेंगे, or if you just believe that okay something will happen only then we will respond, that's not going to work, right? So you have to be active enough. So you go hunt for them in the wild. You try to understand from where an attack is originating, what type of an attack, modus operandi threat actors are following. All this will come into picture. So in order to do this, as part of our blueprint and roadmap, again, vulnerability management and that too continuous scanning is really important for us. So there is something called as four quadrants of asset organization. So your way or your approach to identify your assets, understand the threat vectors, identify the risks, treating the risks, all will actually factor into these four key quadrants inside an organization. First one would be known knowns. So what does this talk about? The ideal category where you're talking about knowing all attributes of the assets. So you know everything about this asset, where it is how it is being interacted with, whether it is internal facing, front facing, what type of tool stack is being utilized, what type of an application it is, whether it holds data, XYZ parameters. And then comes unknown knowns. For example, assets that you know may exist but have no associated information. So you might know about, okay, there is like a Kubernetes infrastructure that is being integrated into the infrastructure, but you don't know how these are configured, where they are hosted, how they are being utilized, or what is the need, the business need for this particular application. That is unknown knowns. You know that it is Kubernetes infra, but you don't know the associated information with this particular infra. Then comes known unknowns, knowing that the asset exists but not having additional information about it. So why it is utilized, which team is using it, or why it was actually inducted into the organization. Nope, we don't have that info. Then comes unknown unknowns, the most critical assets, those that you don't know exist at all. As I said, if you don't know that there is a device of your organization in the public, you will never be able to secure it, right? So you can't protect that you don't know in the first place. So our opportunity when it comes to vulnerability management or risk treatment methodology would be to reduce the unknown unknowns. So the unknowns have the most critical impact on an organization. Just because you didn't monitor them, because you are not going to deploy any security control to secure these particular assets, because you don't have a clarity on what needs to be done for these assets, and you don't even know that this information about your organization, your clientele, your customers, your product is being available in the wild. So that is what we try to achieve through vulnerability management, or if not, any proactive approach an organization is following, is to reduce the amount of unknown unknowns about their own infrastructure. Okay. So as I mentioned, exploitation, vulnerability, threat, and risk. So what is a vulnerability? So it is a weakness inside a system or a gap. Then comes exploitation, where a code is used to take advantage of a vulnerability. Yes, you have a weakness, but how am I going to use this vulnerability? How am I going to leverage this vulnerability? That is where exploits will kick in. Okay, you have created an exploit. So to what extent it can damage? What is what you call the damage that it can do to the organization? That is where the threat comes into picture. Potential cause of an unwanted incident. And then risk, likelihood plus impact of exploitation, right? To what extent this particular exploit can be used on my infrastructure, whether the likelihood of this attack on my infrastructure, my data, and at the same time, the extent to which it can damage my infrastructure. All this is considered. So these are certain key terms that you have to remember when you are having this vulnerability management as part of your resiliency roadmap. So as I mentioned, asset discovery and inventory. So we spoke about this vulnerability scanning. So you use different tools. So if at all you are going with open source, previously Greenbone was open source. You have Nessus. It is a vulnerability scanner. One of the commercial grade, most known or widely adapted industry grade tool is Qualys, Qualys. So Qualys is being used everywhere across the globe. So most of the organizations depend on it because it provides a ton of different features. We'll talk about a sample dashboard also. So risk scoring and prioritization, as I said, the susceptibility. So what type of an impact it will have. So based on all this, the risk scoring is done. So risk management, maybe we'll have a different session, but risk scoring is done. And based on it, the priorities are sorted. So we'll prioritize which vulnerability has to be treated first, which has to be fixed first, or what type of remediation action plan an organization needs to have. So we'll talk about different aspects of this. So asset discovery, identify and categorize all assets. So you need to understand what type of an asset is it. So categorization is really important. Integrate with CMDs, DBs and discovery tools. So you try to ensure that any new device that comes into your infrastructure will automatically be detected and logged. For this, we are going to use these systems. Baseline creation for vulnerability scanning. So what is the frequency that you are having? To what extent you are going to scan? What are the devices that come into the purview of this vulnerability scanning? So some people back out when it comes to endpoint vulnerability scanning because they cannot exhaust the limit, and these applications come with hefty costs. So to cut down on costing, sometimes endpoints are not monitored as part of vulnerability scanning. So they are going to use some third-party open source tools for endpoints, for example, and then go with commercial tools to scan servers and front-facing assets in real time. So vulnerability scanning, so different types of scans that happen as containers, which are like Kubernetes or any other container that you are using, Docker, XYZ. Web applications, you have different types of applications which are front facing. Your network infrastructure, your host infrastructure. Hosts are nothing but operating systems or different applications, packages, services, an entity is using. As I said, so there are different tools out there: Greenbone, OpenWest, Nexpose, Qualys, Nessus. So based on your requirement and your budget allotments, maybe you can choose any tool that you would like to have. There are open source application scanners as well, but to what extent you can use them depends on the business need. Automate scans on schedule. So since your organization has a ton of different devices, there might be thousands of servers or thousands of endpoints. So you cannot scan everything and you cannot get the data in real time. It is really hard for a security engineer. So you try to automate them. And at the same time, based on the risk scoring you have in picture, you are going to use some industry grade standardization to score them, to score the vulnerabilities. And based on the likelihood of impact and the, what you call the domain to which you are catering to. Based on that, you can also create your own prioritization plan. So criticality and exploitability. So exploitability score is also there outside. So there is a website called exploitdb.com. If you go to Kali Linux by default in your Firefox, you will have exploitdb, or you can go and search for that on Google. You will have different exploits, the exploitability scores, what type of vulnerabilities can be leveraged and stuff, and leverage threat intelligence. So as I said, threat advisories are released. So different security researchers create this particular threat intelligence data. They can send a ton of information to you, and you can consume that intelligence and ensure you have a proactive approach towards this risk treatment. So patch management integration, as I said, is it really advisable to deploy a patch or a fix without testing it in the first place? So that you have seen numerous examples in the recent times, including CrowdStrike example that I just gave. So how are you going to test those, and what is the timeline that you will have? So we spoke about policies, we spoke about SLAs inside an organization. SLAs are nothing but service level agreement. So you are catering to a client. So you say, okay, this is the SLA that I would maintain 80%, 90% SLA wherever we meet the timelines that we have set in this particular document. So the moment you say this, then different teams have to work together. For example, a development team might not know the impact of the integration that is being performed inside a web application, for example. So immediately the security team will chip in. They will help the developers understand what type of a vulnerability, what type of an outdated component is being utilized, what type of a new zero day that has been detected. So zero day is nothing but the amount of time you have to respond to this particular attack, which is primarily zero. So you have no time to respond to this attack. That is nothing but a zero day. So for that, you need to have a very, very proactive approach as an organization to ensure that the risk is treated or contained to max extent. Automate patch deployment. So what is the timelines that you follow? Track mean time to remediate. So mean time to remediate, mean time to detect are some of the key parameters for the organization's success ratio when it comes to security ops, right? The how much time will you take to detect a vulnerability or a threat actor campaign against your organization, and how much time do you take to remediate? So that is MTTR, mean time to remediate. Verification and continuous monitoring, as I said, you have verified, you have done your patching, you are going to rescan, verify whether your system is now free from that vulnerabilities, especially critical and high impact vulnerabilities, whether you have treated them, and ensure that your SLAs are met based on the contractual agreements you might be having. So this is a small sample
Quickly,
dashboard of,
just to
yes,
quickly, just to remind you that there's a couple of minutes left, just so that we can have some time
yes,
for
yes,
the
I'm
Q&A.
almost done.
So
Yes,
amazing,
I'm
amazing.
almost done. So this is sample dashboard. This is how it will look like. So if you can go inside this dashboard, if you click on them, you will find different info. So there are different threat actors which are exploiting. You will have the remediation action plans. So here, if you can see, each color represents different severity of vulnerability and what is, so this is just a cloud dashboard that I gave, for example. So it is like a single pane dashboard that you will have in front of you, through which you can actually identify and assess the entire vulnerability assessment for your organization. So it will give you the posture the vulnerability posture or the security posture of your organization through one single pane of dashboard, which is nothing but Qualys. So I believe that's pretty much it. So if at all you're seeing like what would be the future, mostly it is mostly AI driven. So you have automated patching also now in recent times, but to what extent we can go with automated patching? As I said, everything has to be tested. So without testing the update also, you cannot run a patch. So how are you going to run the due diligence is factored in here. Predictive patching recommendations. So what type of vulnerabilities may be out there, what type of an asset you have. So based on machine learning models, maybe these systems will become more adaptive and automated than whatever they are right now. Cloud native vulnerability orchestration. So since most of us are going to hybrid infrastructure and cloud migrations, maybe cloud native vulnerability orchestration would be the future for vulnerability management. That's pretty much it. If at all you want to follow CCOE programs, you can use any of these social media handles. If there are any doubts, maybe Alex, I can take them up for a while. Hope it was useful for you guys. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so very, very much to this really, really great lecture. So just to remind everyone to, if you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes left for questions, to pop them into the Q&A section at the top of your screen if you are on a laptop. I'm not sure if you are on a mobile phone. I'm not sure where it will be. But we already have a couple of questions, so that is good. So type in. So we have here someone from an anonymous question. How do organizations decide which vulnerabilities to prioritize when they have, I guess, too many to manage at once?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about CVSS scoring, most of the tools by default come with categorization based on CVSS, and based on the industry needs or the domain that they are catering to, they try to identify those vulnerabilities, and based on that, they have a remediation action plan in place.
Okay, nice. And then we have another one from another anonymous user. What can experts do to move things? I'm guessing this is from when you had the different stages of things,
Yes,
to move things from unknown unknowns into known unknowns, or I guess known knowns ideally.
Yeah. So when you're talking about, like reducing, unknown unknowns, it is the strategy that an organization is applying, and what is the approach an organization is following, and what type of security controls that have been put in place. For example, attack surface management is there. Okay, fine. Discovery of your assets, and then comes having a proper plan, like how is a device incorporated into your infrastructure, what type of acceptable use policies you have in place, how are you sharing and controlling your data or accessing the data. But there are different pipelines an organization can establish based on the resiliency roadmap, and through which unknown unknowns can be reduced to max extent possible.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I see there's actually just come another one in. What is the best way to use, I guess this is kind of what you were saying at the end, the best ways to use LLMs, large language models, in vulnerability management? So I guess AI, if we...
So whenever you're talking about LLMs, so these systems work on same principle, right? So any system with a cognitive ability will work on this simple fundamental called what type of data that you're utilizing to train these models. So you feed it garbage, it will puke out garbage. So garbage in, garbage out, right? So what information you are collecting, based on what information you are training your LLM, what is the type of algorithmic approach that you are following, what is the industry standard that is out there. For example, say you are categorizing vulnerabilities based on CVSS 3.1. You have fed this information only into your LLM, then it is already outdated, because now we are at CVSS 4.0. And based on asset categorization, so each different types of, even in the IT sector, there is hardware, software, firmware, XYZ. So you have to collect enough information about them and ensure that the model understand this specific subject properly. So once it is there, maybe the LLMs can do a better job at automating response, right? So you're using AI systems or engines to ensure that your burden is reduced to max extent possible. So that can be achieved when your LLM is trained with as much of sanitized and relevant data as possible.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I see that it is the end of the hour that we have for this. I could ask so many questions myself on this. This is really, really fascinating for me, but unfortunately, we do have to stop there. So thank you very, very much, Sai Krishna. It was really, really great to have you. What we do have just before the next session is we have our little Mentimeter quiz. Sai Krishna, you are more than welcome to stay for this, but I know you are probably very busy, so it is completely up to you. But for all of the other people, for all the students, if you want to take part, it is completely optional. It's just a bit of fun and a way for you to, I guess, test yourselves, test your knowledge on vulnerability management. So what I will do, I will share my screen, and then we can get started on the quiz. It doesn't take very long. So let me have a look. Okay, I believe that the screen is now being shared. Cool. So what you would need to do is you need to go to menti.com at the top of the screen here, and then use code 46994037. Now we'll wait a minute or so for everyone to join in. Already a couple of people I see. And like I mentioned, this is completely optional, but it's a bit of fun. We try to do it at the end of every lecture. So, okay, let's begin. So question 1, what is the first step in the vulnerability management lifecycle? A couple of different ideas. Identification going for the most popular one. Couple more seconds. And it was actually asset discovery. So well done to those people who got that one. Which of the following tools is primarily used for vulnerability scanning? Bit of a difficult question, but we like to sprinkle them in. So Nessus is quite popular. Most people going for Nessus. And well done, exactly, that was really good, Nessus. In the CVSS, what does a score of 10.0 represent? Pretty unanimous here. So in which case, exactly, critical severity vulnerability. Well done. What is the main purpose of patch management in vulnerability management? couple of seconds. Well done. To fix security flaws. Well done, well done. Which of the following is a proactive approach to vulnerability management? Most people going for penetration testing. And that's correct. Well done. Penetration testing. What does the term zero-day vulnerability refer to? Most people going for this one. And well done. A vulnerability that is exploited before being publicly known. Well done. Which of the following is not a common source of vulnerability information? Most people going now for one. And it is, yeah, exactly, the WHOIS database. Well done. Okay, why is prioritization important in vulnerability remediation? And really good, really good. To focus resources on the most critical threats. Well done. What is one potential risk of an automated patch deployment without proper testing? Most people going for this one. Really good, well done. System instability or outages. Nice. Which standard helps organizations classify and evaluate IT vulnerabilities consistently? Yeah, I think everyone is confident with this one. This is a nice one. There we go, the CVSS, exactly as Krishna was talking about. Well done. And that was the end. So thank you all so much for joining in that little bit of fun. What we have next in 20 minutes, actually, so is that we have another lecture by Hans Henseler on digital forensics. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I would say have a little bit of a break, grab something to eat, something to drink. I know it's quite late in India for most of you. It's a bit earlier here in the Netherlands. But yeah, take a bit of a break and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.